This is Miles Crawford, and welcome to the TRAC Staffing Podcast. There is a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding that surrounds the staffing industry as a whole. So, we wanted to dedicate this channel to discuss all things staffing. We'll discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I hope you find the information we discuss here valuable. It's meant for you.
In this episode, Miles Crawford talks with Ken Madden about apprenticeship and training models that staffing firms can implement and the benefit that these apprenticeships bring. They discuss the future of the industry as a whole. Ken is the president of Madden Industrial Craftsman. Madden Industrial was started by Ken's father in 1988 and continues to be an important, influential, and successful company in the Pacific Northwest to this day.
Sure, yeah. Well, our company's been in business. We're an industrial staffing company. We do more trades related. We're kind of known for the sweet spot. We actually do everything down from basic labor to project managers, plant managers, estimators, engineering. But we really developed a reputation for providing people more in the actual trades. So electricians, carpenters, welders, machinists. Those type of positions where our reputation was really built. We started in Portland, Oregon. Actually, my brother Paul, and I started the business in 1988. And soon after, my dad had kind of health issues that developed that took him away from the business for a while. And it was at that time I was trying to understand the industry. I think we were considered ourselves more of a specialty contractor. We would actually bid projects, and then those projects developed over time into time and material. Then we kind of started building a reputation around doing shutdown work. And shutdown work in the Pacific Northwest was really heavily used within the pulp and paper wood product industry. And what would happen is you'd have, especially in pulp and paper, it's a very caustic environment because you're working in bleach plants that bleach the pulp into before they make it into paper. And so those facilities would go into shutdown typically 2 times a year, sometimes more, where they would shut the entire process down, and then they would hire large crews of people to go in and do the maintenance work that needed to be done on the plant. So we started doing more in that, and that was more time and material. So it really kind of fit the model of a temporary agency, but we just didn't realize we were a temporary agency.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, okay, yeah.
Oh yeah. So then, I started looking at that model a little bit more. I started attending the Staffing Association in Oregon, which was a chapter of the American Staffing Association. Started learning more about the industry, and within a short period of time, I became the president of that Staffing Association. So then I really embraced the model. We really stopped doing the time and material type bidding and more went to the more traditional staffing model. But during that time, we actually even, it was odd because we were actually bidding projects, and we had to do some of the projects, especially some of the steel fabrication, we had to do off-site. The client wouldn't allow us to do that type of work on their property. So in the first 3 years of the company, we started accumulating a lot of equipment from jobs as well. And so we were looking for a facility, and we just stumbled upon a crane manufacturer that got in some financial trouble. And we had brokered a deal with the crane manufacturer and his landlord, and basically took over the lease and purchased the equipment that the crane manufacturer had in place, which was a pretty substantial fab shop. So we, from there, became a steel fabrication shop in addition to then transitioning to a staffing model. So not a normal route for a staffing company, not a normal route for virtually any business, but I do a lot with the family business program out of Oregon State, and you start to realize family businesses or businesses in general morph over time. And I guess, we do fit that kind of model. Where we made adjustments, and you just take advantage of opportunities that kind of come up.
Yeah.
And that's basically what we did.
Yeah.
So we operate in, the Oregon and Vancouver, Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver. And we have about a 50, 60-mile radius from that area. And then we've moved now into the Seattle market. Just recently opened up a Spokane office as well. So, and then our steel fabrication shop is now becoming more of a manufacturing facility. We manufacture a public restroom that's sold throughout the United States called the Portland Loo, which is developed in Portland. We worked with the city of Portland to develop the prototype, and now we own the intellectual property rights, and we pay the city of Portland a royalty for every loo that we sell. So.
Wow. Yeah, you've diversified over the years.
Yeah, we've become the toilet king in addition to the staffing world. Some would say that's a thin line, but
I mean that's job security. That's a product that's going to be around for a long time. So,
and you make it. That's a good point, because quite honestly, even during this times of COVID, obviously when you expand businesses in different states, Oregon handled the COVID shutdown response differently than Washington did. And so at the time when Washington was almost in complete shutdown, Oregon was still functioning fairly normally, because the governor decided to keep Oregon open, with the exception of obviously restaurants and movie theaters and public venues. Washington's governor went totally separate and really shut down a lot of different businesses, including construction and stuff that would normally be considered essential businesses. He decided to shut that down. So being in different states, Oregon supported the Washington side. Now it's kind of flipped, and I don't know what really caused the flip in Oregon. I think it's just our economies are slightly different, and so now Oregon, Vancouver sales, they had hit a slump for the last 3 months. Now we're starting to come out of that. We're starting to see more and more orders come through. But then in addition, our steel fabrication has remained steady, with the exception of some of the supply chains have slowed things down. But for the most part, that part of the business has remained pretty consistent. So, that diversity has helped us. Quite honestly, through this COVID. Not to mention, we applied for the PPP line of credit, and that has also made it easier as the retained businesses in general. You've been in staffing long enough to know too that in recessions, staffing firms are the first to feel them before when you're in the early stages, because employers will cut staffing first through the companies. And typically we're the first to feel it coming out of it. And since this is more of a V or U-shaped recovery, I don't want to be in a position where I don't have the staff to fill positions when things rebound. So that PPP line allowed us to sustain a certain amount of pain during this downturn, and then hopefully keep us vibrant when the return of business and staffing comes back, which we're seeing now.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've definitely experienced a dichotomy, sort of a tale of two cities, with your experiences between Oregon and Washington State. They've been kind of polar opposites at the same time. I'm sure navigating that dance has been interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, it's interesting because in addition to having our family business, I serve as the chair of the workforce board for the state of Oregon. So that I sit on the governor's board, so that we set policy for the state. And I think you've had some experience with the local workforce boards, I know too.
Right.
And so in Oregon we have the state board, and then we have 9 local workforce boards that actually do the work. Quite honestly, I mean, our board sets policy, influence the governor's decision-making when it comes to workforce issues, but ultimately all we are is a policy board. We do have some oversight. Governor Kitzhofer, before Governor Brown, gave us some authority to do oversight over the local workforce boards, but that's mostly to maintain the strategic planning and goals and the compliance with WIOA that the federal government puts on local workforce boards as well. Yeah. So that's been an interesting situation because it's given me influence on the governor, especially during the shutdown. I was able to get in front of not only the governor, but our legislative representatives and say, look, these are the areas that the Homeland Security considers essential businesses. We need to develop a certain plan for that in our state and stick to that plan. And then with being the chair, all chairs of every state on the workforce boards, on the state workforce board, belong to the National Governors Association. There's a division of the National Governors Association that helps states share best practices throughout the country so that our states can be up to speed, sharing ideas, forming relationships. And it's a very, quite honestly, it's probably the most impressive thing I've ever been a part of. I've met some amazing individuals from other states, but I also see the good of our country. I see the strength of our country. The National Governors Association is bipartisan. They trade off Republican, Democrat every year. So this year, Governor Hogan from Maryland is the chair, and the vice chair is Governor Cuomo from New York. So next year, he'll become, the New York governor will become chair, and then he'll elect, or I think they vote on it, the Republican governor. Yeah. So it's it's not a political organization, even though it tries to be at times, or I shouldn't say it doesn't try to be, but the governors try to influence it in some ways. But for the most part, everybody's trying to stay on path of trying to do what their job is, and that's to get Americans trained up and back to work.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue, actually, into trained up and back to work. I've been trying to do some research and perform my own due diligence on in-demand occupations coming out of the pandemic and the shutdown, what to get ready for. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be returning to work. Make no mistake, a lot of jobs were eliminated during COVID. So we're going to have some issues with facilitating those placements back and trying to reach maximum capacity again. My big concern is that even if our unemployment, before the pandemic, it was once again such a tale of two different worlds. Before the pandemic, we're experiencing near historic low rates of unemployment, and then it just shot up so high. And I just there's no way there won't be people that fell out of the workforce numbers. The labor force participation is going to drop. People are no longer going to be counted. So even if we get back down with the unemployment rate, if it gets deflated and lowers again, that's still not going to be an accurate representation of how well we were able to place everybody back into employment after this, because there's so many social ills that develop. I mean, causation is correlation in this case for long-term unemployment and what happens to the workforce and members of the community. I know our community right now, we're around 90,000, and we have about 9,000 people out of work. Before the pandemic, it was probably closer to 3,500. And we're back down to 7.1% unemployment, and we were up as high as 11 at one point. So we're on the road to recovery, but there's still 9,000 people that have been without a job for circa 6 months. That is not good. Yeah. And the reason that you and I are talking today is to discuss apprenticeships and the staffing model of apprenticeship specifically. So talking about training and talking about upskilling and ties, or at least the information that you're able to glean from the National Governors Association, being on the state workforce board, all these different perspectives. What do you see, Madden Industries specifically, your plan on the way out, and let's tie that into maybe what you're able to do with the apprenticeships or training models that you're wanting to implement, or maybe some adjustments you think you're going to make. What's that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question, because definitely COVID has altered things, but then in addition, all the fires that have occurred in Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest in general too, it's amplified that problem, quite honestly. I mean, we have tens of thousands of people now out of work without homes, with businesses. We have had in Southern Oregon 2 towns completely wiped out by fire. So you can imagine the businesses, the the effect on the individual's lives when their livelihood, their neighborhoods don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has complicated things, and when I was looking at before COVID, I was looking at the model of how does our business grow when we have such skills gaps in certain areas, and we're talking the trades, and quite honestly, during all this, we are still struggling to get people in the trades. There's and it's going to be exponentially harder because there is going to be a certain amount of rebuilding. When you look at those fires, there's going to be a lot of building that comes into those areas. Well, that's going to be the trades that are going to be rebuilding a lot of that. We are already strapped to find good carpenters and carpenter helpers and welders. And quite honestly, our whole country is like that. It's not just an Oregon thing. It's not a Pacific Northwest thing, but that is going to be a challenge. And I looked at it and said, how can we sustain, how can we grow when there is such a skills gap? And during attending the conferences with the National Governors Association, all I heard about is the money that they were going to put into apprenticeships. What they were trying to do is build apprenticeships across the country, because that's the quickest way we're going to close that gap if we're going to do it. It takes a coordination between employers and education coming together to solve this issue. It's not going to be education on itself. It's not going to be employers on themselves. It really requires a more aligned principle of working together. And so I sat there on one of those conferences and I just voiced my opinion to the group. And this is across the country of representatives. And I said, has anybody ever seen the model of apprenticeship work in the staffing industry? And I had everybody shaking their head no. And with the exception of, what was that?
That it's a best kept secret.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and at that time, it was interesting because the woman from Colorado who was, she was actually a state employee at that point. She said, I know there's a law or something that prevents that from happening. And I said, really? I go, can you give me that information? And she said, I'll try. Yeah. Well, I had gone back to Oregon, and several weeks after that conference, and out of the blue, I got a call from Brittany Sakata, who's counsel for American Staffing Association.
Would this have been 2015?
What was that?
Would this have been circa 2015?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And she said, I had a discussion with somebody from Arkansas. And said, they were looking at how do you where they said, that you brought up the discussion of apprenticeship in the staffing industry. Yeah. And she said, explain how that would work to me. And I said, well, the way I look at it, and in simplified form, because I realize we only have an hour and I don't want to go over.
No, you're good.
Okay. But in simplified format, really the way I looked at it is, apprenticeship really was the brainchild of union companies, typically. The unions worked with the employers to do those training, but what they did is the union also formed a hall where those employees were dispatched from, and then when the employer had a downturn in business, came back to. And I thought, well, why can't staffing be the hall? Because we've lost a lot of the unionization of a lot of the industries, especially in the Pacific Northwest, and nobody's playing that role anymore. And I thought, boy, it makes sense for a staffing firm to truly play that role. But if you made a staffing company a training agent in addition to a hall, it becomes a hall on steroids, because not only are we then serving our clients that have agreed to the training principles that we set up, so we belong to a JATC, or a Joint Apprenticeship Training Council. The other employers that are in that training council can share employees. What happens is when they need people, they call us. We send them to them that are a registered apprenticeship. We're tracking hours. We're recording time. We're also factored in our bill rate and pay rate to accommodate for the education component of that training. So we're in essence doing what the union used to do,
Right.
but we're now sharing amongst other employers in the same sector strategy, say like hospital. I've seen this done in hospital staff, but it can also be done in construction. It can be done in manufacturing, and they're sharing employees, but they're also cross-training to some degree because they go from one employer to the next and they pick up this different disciplines as they get to the journeyman level. So when you come out of the journeyman, now you have a certification that shows that you've passed certain standards within that trade.
Yeah.
But you get that cross training that occurs from working from multiple employers at that same time. And then I thought, you can even supply people outside that JATC if you wanted to, which is something a union hall would never do, because the union would want to have employers to be a part of their union.
Right.
Well, ours staffing firm, works differently than that. It really works at mainly our intent is just to train people and scale them up. And so that was the model is based off of that. That was my idea. And then I thought of it from a business perspective and from what is my ROI? What am I going to gain from that? When I looked at it, I think we've talked about this before too. I mean, up to that point, there wasn't a lot of training that we could do as a temporary agency. All we really could do is kind of manually move somebody up the chain by saying, okay, you had experience doing this and this, we're going to move you up here, we're going to pay you a little bit more. But there was nothing that proved that person was getting that training other than the work history that they had.
There wasn't a defined career pathway and a well-defined path to progress and earn to learn, or learn while you earn. None of that modality was built in.
Yeah. And so I looked at it from because a staffing firm really has two clients when you really look at it. You have the employers that you work for, and the employees, and you can't be a good staffing firm without recognizing the importance of both. And so I looked at it and said, look, we're going to add value to our clients because we're going to allow them to train their own employees and get them up to journeyman level. They're going to have a certain level of education that's going to be assured through the program. But then in addition, our employees are going to get something out of it. They're going to actually have, in essence, a college degree or a certificate or an associate's degree through the training program.
Do some of yours actually obtain associate's degrees through the apprenticeship model?
Yeah, that was one of my requirements, is that they could work towards a degree, and it could be stackable. So if they got an associate's and they wanted to go on become an engineer, for example, from an electrician to an electrical engineer, which there is a very thin line on some of that to an engineering discipline.
Yeah.
They could actually do that without having to go backwards. And that's the thing about training. Training should never take you up to a certain level and then you have to go back in order to go forward again. Apprenticeship programs should be stackable, should be able to be like an escalator. You can get off one floor, and then if you want to go to the next floor up, you just get back on the escalator and go. You don't have to go down to the bottom level again to go all the way up to the next level. And so that's the training programs like ours was set up to do that. We started with a welder industrial fabricator position because we had that internally with our own steel fabrication shop, but we also had a lot of clients that were looking for that. Right now, we have a millwright position that we're doing, so we're training for the millwright position. And we're also part of a machining apprenticeship program, so we're working on that.
So whenever you decide to maybe move into another apprenticeable occupation, whatever it may be, what's the process look like to start planning to get the curriculum for that, to get the employers on board for that, to find the candidates that, have the primary skill sets to be good candidate? What does that look like?
That for us, it was a little bit easier because the trades, for the most part, the majority of the trades have already gone through some apprenticeship program to begin with. So it was just a matter of looking at some of the existing programs and saying, does that fit the model that we want to work with? And so that case, it was a lot easier. Now, apprenticeship.
The State Department of Labor to help come up with that curriculum then, or
We did a little bit, yeah. See, and Oregon's unique too, and I think we definitely had this discussion because I was confused on why you guys are able to do things a little bit differently than what Oregon did, and I found out that Oregon really has an intermediary between the Department of Labor. With us, it's called the Bureau of Labor Industries. It's the labor commissioner in our state is elected position. It can also be political, and that's the sad part of it is, you know, it can create these a layer of barriers that have been difficult, quite honestly. And honestly, if I hadn't been the chair of the state workforce board and worked directly for our governors, or governor, I guess I should say, I've worked for 2 governors now, but having that reputation, having a business, I was able to push things through that I don't think a regular business truly could have done. Sure. And so I've been able to gain the good faith of the agency, and I've told them my intent is not to harm the system in any way. It's not to degrade it in any way. I'm not union or pro-union or non-union. I am pro-employee.
Yeah.
Point blank. If I can advance somebody up the scale, that should be good for a union employee. It should be good for a non-union employee.
Yeah.
I'm really there to improve somebody's lives, and I'm not going to say that I'm just doing it truly for the good of my self-esteem too. I'm a businessman. I want to make money off it.
I think it's called reciprocal altruism.
Exactly.
That's the term I like.
And so I looked at it from that perspective. Is if it's a good model, it will work for everything.
Right.
It will fill all the niches, and it will advance our business going forward. And it has. We have a lot of employees that want to be a part of the training program because they see it as a road to higher wages, a secured employment. Actually a way of them feeling good about themselves, which the trades normally haven't really had that. In the 30 years I've been doing it, I used to have welders come in and go, I'm just a welder, I'm just a carpenter. And it was like I'm sorry, but that's all I am. And it's like, well, those trades have built our country, and without them, we wouldn't be where we are. So, I wanted to give value to those trades. And I thought that by doing those training programs, that we could do that.
Yeah, those are some of the most respectable occupations across the board. They built the country, they still maintain the country. Without those occupations, and obviously we see the unintended backlash that always happens as a result of good intentions with, pushing higher education. Then you get the skills gap and all the skilled trades that we are starting to realize we've got a problem, and these positions are really important. Oh, also, it can afford a very high quality of life. I mean, a good carpenter, and there's entrepreneurial opportunities for working for yourself after a few years. Apprenticeship programs, it's real interesting. Do you have any thoughts on why, across the pond, our friends in the UK and in Europe leaned so heavily on the apprenticeship model, and we seem to have to really pulled off? You had even mentioned earlier it's the National Governors Association, and I hear talks of it all the time. All the finances and money that are being directed to apprenticeships. So, what do you see? Why does Europe seem to really embrace the apprenticeship model, and we seem to sort of treat it like a 4-letter word?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And we've studied the Swiss model, the German model, the British model. And I think the reason why they embrace it is it works. I mean, quite honestly, there's not a stigma associated with being a part of an apprenticeship program, especially in the trades. I mean, it's probably even looked at as equal, maybe slightly even more than somebody that takes the more traditional college route through to employment. So that's a standout, at least with Europe, and I think the United States kind of puts that down as blue collar, and that changing that stigma is a challenge.
Yeah.
But I think we're getting there, and I think the other thing is there's more of an alignment from K through 12 in Europe to the college system, or they have trade schools, similar to a community college, but in the United States, that alignment is helter-skelter, quite honestly. I can speak intelligently about Oregon. I don't, and I'm assuming this is pretty true about other states. So the National Governors Association, again, is looking at it and go, how can we take that apprenticeship model and move it down the line? Because on average, the average age of apprentice in the United States is around 28, 29, you know, where in Europe, you're looking at 18, 19. Yeah. And so what they're looking at is, you know, there's a lot of these models called pre-apprenticeships where you're just exposing somebody to an apprenticeship. But the National Governors Association has decided to support the PIA model. It's the acronym is PAYA, and it's Partnership for Advancing Youth Apprenticeships. And what that does is it takes the high school students and enters them into an apprenticeship program based off of employers within their own community. So for the first, you know, you start as a junior and you spend a quarter of your time on a job, working with an employer, getting paid while you're doing that apprenticeship program. And then your senior year, you go to 50% of your time is done on that job, 50% done in the classroom, where junior years, a quarter of the time is on the job, 3/4 is in a classroom study. When you finish your senior year, you receive your high school diploma, not only for the classroom work, but in addition because you've been doing work on the job or training on the job. And then you transition immediately into a community college. And now your first year at community college, you're going to be working 3/4 of the time for the employer group. And then 1/4 of the time is going to be in the classroom. And by your second year of community college, you're working full time at your employer, but you come out with an associate's degree. So now you've got some college already paid for. You've now got a full-time job, receiving full-time journeyman wages, and you've aligned the system. You've aligned the high school system to the community college system, but it's aligned also to the employers within that community. So students aren't getting an education and have to leave the area, leave their state. They actually find work within their own state. And to me, that model makes perfect sense. And I don't, you know, I think Oregon's been slow to embrace it. And trust me, every time I get out there in meetings and public forum, I'm endorsing it. I'm talking about it. It's working in Wisconsin. It's working in Minnesota. It's working in South Carolina. It's working in Tennessee. And it should be working across the country because it is a model that's successful in those states that are using it. And the ones that just either don't know about it yet or are slow to respond are gonna be behind the 8 ball.
Well, our community, Fort Smith, Arkansas here, and I'm proud to say we're in good company. We've been kind of championing that same strategy. Our leadership has put together the youth apprenticeship model. A lot of local manufacturers have stepped up to support a lot of these. We have a couple of great leaders that are focusing on aligning, you know, K through 12 with higher education. Voters just voted overwhelmingly in support of a new millage increase to help fund a career and technical education training program through our public school systems and to set up different models in our region. And we've got some great things going on. So I can speak to the value of those programs.
It's what you're doing. It's going to lead to success across the country, quite honestly, because you've got to look for successful models. You know, you talk to somebody in our state and it's like, is it being done anywhere? And it's like, how is it being done? And can I talk to somebody? And really, you know, sadly, I can speak again in Oregon, it's not easy to create an apprenticeship program. Even when you're stealing basic one that already exists, it's still a process and it's time consuming. So the easier you can make it for people to do, it opens the world up to them and it gets easier from there on out.
I love the comparison you made to how unions were, you know, really the folks that spearhead and rightfully get the credit in the U.S. at least for the apprenticeship programs, and the likelihood of a similar role is sort of the hall that the staffing company can play with their collection and access to a wide wide number of workforce for that region. I have a very similar sort of view and belief of the staffing company's role in workforce development. I think that we are one of the biggest untapped resources to help solve a lot of these puzzles. We're perfectly positioned, being labor market facilitators and intermediaries, the access to the workforce that we have, the access to the diverse clientele that we have, the training programs that we already have, the quasi apprenticeship. They may not be registered, they may not be labeled that, but we partner with a lot of our clients to provide hands-on training, classroom training, pre-employment training, safety training, a lot of diverse services. And I'm very eager to see our industry. I think our industry honestly has to transform or die. I don't think staffing as it's been known as just a source for temp or cheap or non-skilled labor is a model that is going to exist in 5 to 10 years. I think the labor market is getting entirely too competitive. We're going to start seeing, and we've already seen, this is all just a projection. So anytime you start telling the future, you're going to be wrong. So everything I'm about to say is probably misguided at some base, and in 5 years, this may be proven irrelevant. But as of right now, so we can see the CARES Act, and now we're looking at the HEROES Act and this financial assistance coming out to people across the U.S. There's a sort of wage gap to where folks of a certain earning level are better off to accept that than they are to, invest in their careers and go higher. And I think what we may see is in a model that's increasingly automated and tech savvy, and a lot of our low to mid-wage jobs are vulnerable to automation, or maybe just improved efficiencies will make them a redundant labor force. And we know employers, the model they're set up is to cut costs, run lean. And so when some of these positions do get, and obviously new jobs will be created too, but it's really hard to, the analogy, it's hard to retrain a truck driver to be a coder. It's really difficult to take somebody who's done one thing and has one way of sort of viewing the world and a very specific skill set in a very specific industry, and then throw them into coding. I mean, these are kind of a night and day a lot of times. So I think our industry, in order to adapt and survive and make it to the next phase, is going to have to diversify its offerings. Training is going to be a very big part of that. Upskilling is going to be a huge part of that, because I think there will be a lot of Americans, especially, who are, quote unquote, left behind with some of the advances in technology. Advanced manufacturing is putting out more and more productivity every year with less and less labor. Whereas production and employment used to kind of be tied together and inseparable. Those two numbers have now been separated, and they're no longer correlated. So even with producing more than we ever have before, our manufacturers are being able to do that through smarter processes and lean operations and less labor. So we're seeing a shift. And I once again, I think our industry, being in the position that it is in the labor market, has so much opportunity to reinvent itself. You had mentioned how malleable just your business has been based on different opportunities as they presented themselves, and how you sort of took an unorthodox maybe route to modern day Madden Industries. But I really think that for staffing firms as a whole to continue to thrive, there's going to have to be innovation, there's going to have to be adaptation, there's going to have to be, quote unquote, unorthodox strategies. And a lot of that is just going, where we've never gone before. You referenced earlier in your story about the phone call I had made because I was told that the Department of Labor prohibited staffing firms from being planned sponsors. And I said, why? That doesn't make sense to me. And there wasn't a good answer for why. That was just how it was. And then they reached out to folks such as yourself and got more information, and the American Staffing Association was able to work with the Department of Labor to get that rescinded for the most part. I think there was still an asterisk for a while, but in 2015 I remember getting the email and I printed it off and put it on my wall. I was pretty proud of that. That we were able to work to allow staffing firms to become plan sponsors. And I think that's what it's going to take, is getting into things such as value-added services. But you mentioned how we serve, two masters, which makes the dichotomy of running a staffing firm very complicated, because you have to keep your workers happy, and you've got to treat them right, and you've got to pay them well, and you've got to protect them, and then you've got to offer competitive services to your customers. And walking that line and treating both of them with fairness and respect, and making both a priority can be tough sometimes, making them both a priority. But an apprenticeship model is a perfect blend and marriage of allowing the staffing firm to take those two worlds and bring value to both of them. What are your thoughts on the ability of staffing firms? You're working in a very obvious, I would say, apprenticeable sector within the skilled trades. That's where a lot of people there, and the millwright and things of that nature. How do you think staffing firms and apprenticeships and this direction looks over the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, how does that continue to play out in your mind?
Honestly, your comments are spot on. First off, I think our industry in particular is well positioned to transform, to be transformational for other businesses out there looking for labor, and to transition training into new areas that we've probably not seen before. And so what I see for the future, and I think, you and I are very similar. We looked at things. I think most people in the staffing industry live in a bubble and see things day to day as the operational. In order to really think strategically, you have to rise above. You have to get to the 30,000 foot level and really look at our industry and say, is this sustainable? Ultimately, yeah, I can be pulling somebody from one account to another and play this game. Ultimately, as a nation, we're going to have to start training more people. We're going to have to start advancing people up on the pay scales. And so I agree 100% with what you said. I think this model, will start being embraced by other staffing firms. We've had the discussion with some of the other staffing firms that are looking at it. Some aren't going through the process of doing the registered apprenticeship program. I think that, for me, that made more sense, but it doesn't have to be. You can create a non-registered apprenticeship program as long as you're following the principles of what those apprenticeship training programs are. And an apprenticeship, traditionally was trades, but it doesn't have to be either. We've talked about, you looked at bartending. Yeah. You can look at the medical fields. You can look at technical support or IT positions. Yeah.
The Department of Labor has a list of what they consider apprenticeable occupations, and it's thousands of jobs long.
Oh, absolutely.
Very diverse.
Yeah, there's an apprenticeship program out of Washington called Apprenti, and I think we've talked about this before too. But that's a plug and play system. At the time it was 6 disciplines within the IT fields, and they came with a program. Basically, here's the system. You sign on board. We have online training for those positions. We can skill you up. Starting in Washington and Seattle area. We've tried to bring it down in Oregon. We're going to do it in Eugene, which is center of our state, and then Bend, which is on the other side of the Cascades, also center of our state. Eugene has some issues with it, but Bend is embracing it. But then COVID hit, and I'm not really sure where that system stands now. But those are the things that I think our industry. You're right about playing the intermediary. I think staffing, when you look at the youth apprenticeship model, employers are afraid of hiring somebody below the age of 18. So staffing companies, you can do it, but I think employers look at it and say the liability is just not worth it. Well, staffing firm can play that intermediary, be the person doing the payroll, complying with labor laws as we go through, and take that liability off the employer's plate so that they're more apt to do that and be part of the training program, because they want the pipeline as soon as possible to good workers. And they also know coming out of high school is where you start training people.
Right.
And so some of the soft skills that employers complain about now become less and less of an issue when you start exposing younger people to work on the job.
And I mean, we haven't even discussed the benefits that an apprenticeship model affords the company, like higher levels of retention, more productivity, more satisfied workers, safer workplaces. I mean, the list goes on and on. These are all things that should be boxes that you want to check as an employer and are the main focus of a lot of employers. And
well, you brought up that one point. I mean, this was interesting because my company actually has a union contract with the steelworkers union, and I negotiated a 3-year contract. I negotiated that contract every 3 years, and I thought, well, I'll sell the training program. They needed millwrights. We have a lot of millwright maintenance people at the facility. So during the negotiation, I first approached the client and said, would you be interested if we could train? Absolutely. We would love that. You could do that. That'd be great, because we want to see the skill level increase, not only with the existing crew, but we want to see with anybody else you bring in. We want to be a part of that. We realize there's a skills gap, that issue needs to be closed. I sat down with the union thinking, okay, this should be a no-brainer. I mean, you guys, that's all you know is training, and you talk about it.
Right.
They have the hardest time with it. And that was the biggest hurdle for me to get over, is explaining to them, look, this is going to get more members into the union. This is going to improve the skill sets, the value to your employees. It was confusing to them. And that blew me away, because I thought they were going to embrace, I thought the hard sell was going to be the client.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I'm even a little perplexed by that. So the business was welcoming of union labor, but the union was a little hesitant.
They already know we're a union block within their company. So we were already, the union was already established. This was just during the opener, when we usually go over wages and benefits. There's something usually the employer wants, and an employer usually wants most cases want to see a skill level increase, wants to, and so that was an issue. So I addressed that with the client immediately. I said, look, we're going to work at building up a standard. I'll let you be a part of that, setting what you would want to see in not only existing staff, but in new hires as they come through and start training up to those levels. And that they were fine with it, because they were already accepted of the union. The union's already been there. We had this contract for 20 plus years.
When you have a union contract, what does that consist of? What's your role in that contract?
It's a weird role, and I'll be honest, it's a staffing company. And I had this conversation years ago with the American Staffing Association. I said, I don't think we've ever encountered this situation ever before with any other staffing firm. And I'll admit, it is weird, because we sit there. I have to bargain with my crew, then I go to the client and I bargain. But with my crew, I have the union rep that I also negotiate with. So there's all this negotiating back between my crew, the union rep, reaching on something, and then finally the client has to approve it, because any pay increases or whatever, I have a markup on top of it. It's just like a regular staffing company. So it's an oddball situation, and I sit there basically at almost a same situation as the union rep, who's trying to convince his crew that this is what we should be asking for, or we should be approving. And I'm trying to do the same with me and my client. And ultimately, the relationship works. And we've been doing it for 20 plus years. And, it's odd, but it's worked for us.
I'm a fan of odd, man. I think that's where a lot of growth is.
Yeah, you should come to Oregon. There's a lot of odd. No, but it's again, it's thinking outside the box on certain things too. And I think you're spot on. You saw it. early on too. This is, we need to do something. We need to offer value. We have to offer value to our clients. We have to offer value to our employees. These type of training programs, I mean, finding people that you are competing, if that's all you do is finding people for an employer, you're competing with a lot of other companies that do the exact same thing.
Like Indeed. I mean, you can find people on Facebook for free. So that's my big thing is, what is the additional value that you're bringing outside of just, we need a body to show up? Like you have to be able to prove a value or services rendered. And I really think the way that you do that hook, line, and sinker is by this medium of training and upskilling and all this additional value that you bring to the table.
Yeah. And I think bringing employers together so that small, medium, and large employers can train to a certain level. And the value of that, the thing I've found out through all this process, the value of that cross-training is critical. Because what employers look at is that I can't train somebody all the way up to the journeyman level, but I can train them in a segment of it. But yet what I'm looking for is I need somebody that's trained in all of it. So that cross-training that occurs amongst other employers, and the construction industry has figured this out. I mean, they know that. The carpenter apprenticeship programs are probably ideally suited for apprenticeship because they do that. A job starts and job ends. And you have to go then to another project. And through those, sometimes you're working for the same employer, but for most instances, you're working for multiple employers. And you learn something from each employer. And so that cross-training already occurs in the construction industry. Manufacturing is a little bit more private. They don't like sharing that. But I think once they start to realize that, hey, without doing this, we're all in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
We can solve the problem by coming together and training. And then when they do, they realize that cross-training is beneficial.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's to me, it's like, it makes so much sense. But you had just mentioned the reservations that the manufacturing industry has. I see a lot of the same reservations here regionally. So I'm glad to know it's not just a regional makeup. It seems to be at play on a larger scale. But yeah, I mean, diversified experience, exposure to different environments and circumstances of comparable or similar, industries and trades does nothing but add perspective and value and understanding for an employee. So you think that would be a highly sought after skill set and kind of a KSA. Real quick, let's talk specifically about your apprenticeship program from the candidate side. What does an ideal candidate look like? What sort of commitment do they need to make? I know a lot of apprenticeships are sometimes 4,000 to 5,000 hours in length. I mean, so what would a candidate get out of it or need to commit to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And each program is slightly different. But first of all, we have a minimum standard requirement that they have to go through. So whether that be a minimum, they have to pass a math test in certain areas. They have to reach certain criteria before they're entered into it. And then, the other nice part about apprenticeship is you don't have to start at the bottom. We've had some people that are pretty close to, say, like a millwright level, where they've been doing millwright work up to a certain point. I don't have to tell that person, look, you have to start back as a level 1 apprentice. You might test out, or we form a committee, and a committee of management and labor that comes together and reviews the person's criteria. And they might say, look, you're more a level 3 or a level 4. And so we don't have to accept people all at level 1, so you can advance somebody up. And then it's just a matter of meeting benchmarks, and a lot of that is hourly benchmarks and then classroom study. So when they get to a certain level, automatically their pay is increased to the next level of apprenticeship. And we have 8 levels of apprenticeships for our current apprenticeship models.
How long does it usually take a candidate to progress through them and graduate?
On average, is about a 4-year program.
Okay, so real similar. I know our local IBEW has an apprenticeship, and I think theirs for an electrician is 5 years. So, and I think we have a local plumbing training facility from a union that I think is right at 4 years. So it's kind of standard. You'd mentioned the contract with the union. Are you able to have these discussions with them to sort of massage your program and learn from them and exchange ideas? So they're the originators.
Yeah, exactly. And so we did have to kind of explain it. What we were able to do initially, and without going into a long, convoluted story, but we really looked at on the millwright model, we looked at an existing JATC, a Joint Apprenticeship Training Council, that already was training for millwright positions. The weird part is that ultimately the group, we didn't see eye to eye in some of the training programs, so we ended up leaving that JATC and creating our own training program that was basically mirrored off of the existing JATC. So it was pretty simple to kind of get that. But I was able to take that model and show it to the union and say, like, this is what we're looking at doing. And typically what you do is with our 8 levels of apprenticeship, it's based off of the journeyman wage. So whatever the journeyman wage is, level 1 is a percentage of that journeyman wage, and level 2 is an increase in that percentage, and 3, 4, 5, all the way up.
Yeah.
And so the union was accepting of the fact that, hey, it's based off our union scale. And we're going to be adjusting it off the apprenticeship. So the unions were pretty accepting of the increase.
Do they go by Davis-Bacon Act stuff, prevailing wage? I mean, or just
more of the construction industry does that, but on ours, there was nothing like that. Ours was more bargained. Usually, if you're in a JATC, it's a common accumulation of the group's journeyman wage, and it's an average of all those wages put together. So it could vary.
Gotcha.
With ours, because it was just one employer, it was a lot easier to do.
So who are the necessary parties to a successful staffing apprenticeship model?
Well, in Oregon, it would be the Bureau of Labor Industries, because they ultimately approved the model. In other states, it could be directly working with the Department of Labor, which would be a godsend, because that's a lot easier and maybe a little bit more flexible in some ways. But in Oregon, you'd first have to go through the Bureau of Labor Industry. You also need an educational partner. With our case, again, I had the advantage because I was a board of directors for the largest community college in the state of Oregon, which is Portland Community College. Those are elected positions, so I actually had to run a campaign and get elected, which was an interesting. Definitely wasn't something that was on my radar, but I got sweet talked in by a president, and at that time he was the existing president, and he retired after that. But the nice part is that having that influence over that college was crucial, because a lot of colleges want to do in classroom, and quite honestly, you can do 90% in classroom, 10% in classroom, 90% online. And I wanted online. Last thing, and especially now in COVID, I think everybody's 100% online. But Portland was getting more and more crowded. Difficulty in parking, traffic, and putting somebody through an hour worth of traffic to get to a classroom in order to study didn't make sense to me, and I wanted to be able to open it off so they could do it online. So if I hadn't been a board of director, that would have been a harder pull. But being a director of the college, I was able to say, no, this is where we're going to move. And also being the chair of the workforce board for the state of Oregon, which works very closely with our education system. It allowed me to make some of those changes. So, but in other states, quite honestly, you don't have to go through all that hassle. You would go to your local workforce board, like that you are a part of, and they should be able to help you through some of these processes. It is what our Department of Labor is striving for, to get more apprenticeship programs going forward, and that's why the funneling of dollars and money, because unfortunately that's how you motivate people.
Yeah.
And so, that would be the number one in most states, including Oregon. I would even, you wouldn't have to do it on your own like I did it. I could have gone to my local workforce board and talked to the people there and said, hey, like, I'm an employer. I want to create a training program. How do I do it?
Yeah. And so you've got the educational components usually played by a community college, someone of that nature. You've got obviously the staffing firm. You've got the employer, who is the equivalent of the OJT portion, the on-the-job training. That's the work portion. Where does the curriculum formation come from? Is that just based on conversation, reviewing existing kind of manuals, and then massaging that to fit your specific needs?
That's exactly how we did it. Yeah, we looked at existing programs and tweaked it from there. And we sat down with our educational providers and then our employers and said, what are you looking for? What's critical to you? And so we really built the curriculum based off of that. There's some givens, there's going to be safety. There's going to be, typically at least in the trades, math and some of the other requirements. But for the most part, it was you custom build it and you build it for your needs.
So your candidates who are in these programs, they remain employees of Madden Industries, or do you let them, roll over?
We've decided to open up that model a little bit. If you decide to join our JTC and comply with becoming a training agent, then you can hire those people after a probationary period. With us, it's 720 hours, 90 working days. Okay. So then you can hire those person. We don't charge a fee for that. But we also know now that you're going to train them up to a journeyman level too, because you're a training agent as well. If you're not in that JATC, but you still need somebody that's...
So they need to be in the JATC so that they can continue the apprenticeship.
Exactly.
Training. Gotcha.
Exactly. But what we've done is, that's contractual with our clients. So they are signing an agreement saying that, they're going to be part of this training program. They're going to meet our standards and they're going to train somebody up to that level. What we have done with other employers that don't want to be contractual, don't want to go the step of becoming a JATC, we say, look, we'll provide you somebody. We have to designate a journeyman at there because we have to keep a ratio of an apprentice to a journeyman. It can be our employer, or it could be theirs because of the employer relationship. We can kind of have them work under the supervision. We just have to verify that person's skill set is what we would classify as a journeyman. In which case they can employ that person through us, but they are not allowed to hire that person because they'd be pulling them out of the JATC training period and they wouldn't be advancing to a journeyman level.
Gotcha.
So it's incentive enough for them to say, okay, we'll join the apprenticeship program.
Yeah.
We'll become a training agent because ultimately that's what they want to do is hire somebody.
Yeah. It's all about finding the best skilled workforce that you can and having access to that pipeline for attrition and expansion and everything else. I mean, that's a key component to running a successful business. What would you say have been kind of maybe some of the toughest obstacles to implementation from a staffing firm specific? Maybe not politically, maybe not, it seems like you were the victim of good fortune multiple times with the positions and sort of influence you were able to leverage to help make some of these things happen. But for staffing companies getting into these, what are maybe some pitfalls or some hurdles they need to be ready for?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is training your own staff to understand the concept. Because obviously a sales rep's going to go out and talk to their clients about it. They have to be able to understand what it is. Same with the recruiter. If the recruiter is going to be talking to an applicant that's going to be going into the apprenticeship program, they have to be able to explain it and define it, to a level that there's no miscommunication or misunderstanding. So that's the first part is really once you understand the concept, once you've approved something, really sitting down and training your staff to do that. And then it's really just getting out there and explaining both to the applicant and to the client the advantages of the system. A lot of people see apprenticeship as union. So that means I'm part of the union, and trying to get that that hurdle covered can be difficult at times.
Yeah, I think we discussed that in one of our prior talks, how union's a four-letter word, and when you say apprenticeship, I mean, it might as well be the same thing as saying union. It's like they're interchangeable terminology. So I think we need a rebrand for the word apprenticeship and to help some of that through.
Well, and honestly, when I go out, I typically don't say apprenticeship as much. I say we have registered training programs.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think, I mean, that's what it is.
Sure.
Apprenticeship is, to me, is a buzzword that comes with preconceived notions. So
Yeah.
it's part of the training program. I think that's an easier term to use with an applicant. It's not as great a term to use with an employer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can understand. It kind of conjures up memories of old and Jimmy Hoffa and who knows what else. What about any obstacles that you had to overcome with, you had mentioned the bureau that you work with as opposed to DOL. How do you communicate? Because even my own state Department of Labor, I've been in conversation with a few times over the years, but nobody in Arkansas is doing this. That's a staffing firm. Nobody really, I mean, there's only a handful of folks, and I'm talking to probably 50% of them right now that are really doing this model. So how do you value or rather shape that conversation to communicate the value to, say, a Department of Labor? Because even though I've had conversation with my local Department of Labor, every time I call, every year or so, I have to tell them who I am, re-explain my idea, because it doesn't stick because they're not familiar with it. They don't know it. It's new. Well, it's not even new. It doesn't exist technically here. So what is the selling point that a staffing firm can use when approaching, say, a Department of Labor to help get something like this off the ground?
Yeah, well, they should all know this, because the Department of Labor, the labor commissioner or labor secretary is driving this. I mean, they're pushing that out, so they should know that. But you're right, they don't. When you get on a local level, they don't. It can be new to them. And quite honestly, I think you should probably found this with almost any pioneer of any concept. That you have to. It takes a while before it's understood and accepted across the board. So sadly, it's going to be a challenge for the next few years until it's really established itself as a success, which I know it will be, because what we're doing is training people to get jobs, and there's too much of a win-win for everybody in this whole situation for it not to be successful. But you're right, you're going to have to explain to people over and over and over again, and I've had to do it. And to me, it doesn't seem like, it doesn't seem that complicated to me. Maybe it's just because I've been doing it long enough. But for other people, I get the glossy-eyed look when I explain it to somebody. And but then when the light comes on, boy, you see the enthusiasm, and it takes off. So
when candidates register with your firm, do they all register to enter the training program, or do they specifically opt in? If that's a path they want to go, do you just make?
Yeah, they would have to opt in. And right now we have a list that we have of people that are wanting to get into a training program. Quite honestly, we probably have more people than we have positions currently. But we've been kind of slow to the process as well. And I mean, we'll pick up. It's just we've been dealing with one issue after the others with COVID and just our business.
One of the, and we can kind of wrap it up here. I'm glad I thought of this. I've run into this a lot. So staffing firms have evidently been accused of draconian practices within the last 3 to 4 decades. And I know one of the biggest obstacles that I face constantly when having these conversations with the local workforce board, even where I have relationships, have been there for years, and then at the state board, and at all these different state department, a lot of times what comes back is, oh, that doesn't qualify under WIOA, under apprenticeships, because it's temporary, and it's a temporary staffing firm, and it's temporary employment. How were you able to remove that notion, talking about preconceived notion, that this isn't temporary. This is an apprenticeship program. It's a co-employment arrangement and relationship. It's leveraging multiple parties. It's value. How were you able to do that?
Yeah, that is a great question, because for some reason our industry is looked down as, and part of the reason why we were probably forbidden through those bulletins from even being a part of a registered apprenticeship program.
Yeah.
I think some of it was fear from the unions that we would take over the union positions. But I think also it's just, I think they do look at our industry with a certain amount of disdain and say, no, we're not talking permanent positions. Yeah. Well, I can speak, from my company perspective, that I've had employees that were employed for me close to the 30 years that we've been in business. And I'm not talking internal staff. I mean, I'm talking, what would technically be temp employees.
Yeah.
But I think also when I get around and say, look, when I'm committing to a training program, our training program's 4 years. I'm committed to employing that person for at least 4 years. I think that's where it's changed. I do have the advantage.
4 years is longer than the average stint that most people have at a job anyway. So
yeah. And I think, I had the advantage of also having a steel fabrication facility, because I'm looked at as a legitimate employer from that standpoint. But it's irritating, quite honestly. It's irritating that our industry is so looked down. And I think it's changing. And that's part of these training programs is why my way of saying, look, we are a legitimate employer. We got to stop apologizing. Just like the tradespeople who used to come in my office back in the early days. I have something to be proud of. You have something to be proud of. Every staffing company has something to be proud of. And we have to start really, stepping up and saying, look, we need to be held in a higher light than what we've been over the years. We have some, damage control we might have to do in certain areas, but for the most part, we are legitimate employers. And I know, getting back to your earlier statement, when I was president of the Oregon Staffing Association at that time, there was talk that, staffing companies employed close to 30% of the workforce across the country.
Yeah.
I don't know where that number lies today or where it's at, but you look at 30% of the workforce, and if we can raise and skill that 30% up,
right.
As a nation, we become stronger.
Yeah.
And so, they should be behind us, helping us do something like that, because that's what we're trying to make our country better across the board by building our workforce and making it stronger.
Well, you had mentioned there have been bad actors in our industry, as there have every industry. We do have some misconceptions about our industry. We have candidates that I come across all the time that treat us like we pay with monopoly money. It's not a real gig whenever we have work lined up with wages paid, insurance, everything, but it's not a real firm. And I think part of it is, maybe our industry is in need of rebranding and an industry overhaul. The term temporary doesn't do us any favors. I like contingent. I like contract. Even temp to hire. 90+% of our placements where I am here at TRAC Staffing now are temp to hire, meaning permanent, meaning after your probationary period, if you perform good work like you're supposed to, show up on time, you have a permanent position with that employer. You roll over. So this idea of temp work, which is now the gig economy. If anything, we were predecessors to where the majority of the new work is created, which is in finite scopes and projects. And then it's bid out on a temporary basis. And the firms that are most well-positioned in the labor market to handle this influx of new work being created in the gig economy are like being blackballed from innovating and being able to, spread our wings and take advantage and move into these areas. And it's frustrating. And once again, I come back to that, the bureaucracy that has to be overcome, that archaic laws or regulations or prohibitions. And we could talk all day about some of these things, but I was just curious how you were able to overcome some of those obstacles there in the Pacific Northwest, because I'm still working to overcome some of those right here in Arkansas. I think it's just really, it's awareness. You had mentioned having the good fortune once again of having sort of your own Craftsman operation going as well, so you could sort of innovate in your own little laboratory there and work those models out. I'm sure the value of that can't be overstated, but my hope is that I can take your hard-won battles and implement them with less resistance based on you kind of shining the light and showing me the direction to get some of those things off the ground.
Yeah, I have no doubt. I mean, I think, in general, we all have to keep doing that in our states. I mean, we're trying to solve problems, not just, make a living sometimes. And honestly, I don't get paid to be the chair of the workforce board for the state of Oregon.
Yeah, not paid roles.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even get paid to be on the college board. These are volunteer positions, and I care about my community. I care about my children's future. I care about where I live, and more importantly, I care about my state and my country. And I think, it's people like you and I that really, have a vision that says we can do better, and we will do better. And I think that's what you just got to keep remembering.
Well, Ken, you're certainly a patriot. I can see that. So evidently the key to success is just be a patriot and go fight for your country and win some for the little guy. Man, we're a little over the hour. I've enjoyed every minute of this. I appreciate your time today. Maybe we'll be able to do it again in the future and lock up another 60 to 90 minutes and discuss the next frontier of what implementation looks like.
That sounds great, Miles. Thanks again for having me.
All right. Thanks, man.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thank you for listening. And now it's time to get back to work.